The first time she said it, I thought I'd misheard. The restaurant was warm in that polished, expensive way. Low amber lights, white tablecloths that felt thick as folded linen. The kind of place where the water glasses never sat empty for more than a minute. I remember the soft clink of cutlery, the quiet jazz humming under everyone's voices, and the smell of roasted garlic drifting from some table behind us. My son sat across from me, cheeks pink with happiness, shoulders pulled back like he was finally stepping into the man he'd been practicing to become. He looked so much like his father in certain angles that it still made my chest tighten, even after all these years. And beside him sat a young woman with a smooth blowout and calm eyes. Eyes that didn't fidget the way nervous eyes do. She held herself like she belonged anywhere she chose to sit. Her name was Tessa. At least, that's what my son Nathan had said when he called me 2 weeks earlier. "Mom," he'd said, breathless like a teenager. "I'm bringing someone to dinner. She's it. I want you to meet her." I'd smiled into the phone and told him I couldn't wait. I'd asked a few gentle questions. Where she worked, where she was from, what she liked. Trying not to sound like an interrogation, trying to sound like the kind of mother who made space, not demands. "She's private," Nathan had laughed. "But she's excited to meet you." That was why, when Tessa leaned forward at the engagement dinner and said, "Thank you for raising him the way you did," I felt something soften in me. Those are words a mother keeps tucked away like a pressed flower. Words you don't expect to receive, but you never stop hoping for. I lifted my glass slightly, my lips curling into a smile. And then she added, warmly, as if we were picking up a conversation we'd been having for years. "I still think about that Christmas when you let him stay up late to help you wrap the presents. He told me you made him use that old tape dispenser that always jammed, and you kept laughing about it." My smile stayed on my face, but my fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. Because Nathan and I had never had that Christmas. I know what Christmases I've had. I know them the way I know the layout of every HR office I ever worked in, every year filed away, dates and emotions catalogued in my mind. And I knew, with a steady certainty that made my stomach drop, that Nathan had never been the boy helping me wrap presents with a broken tape dispenser. In our house, I wrapped gifts alone, quietly, after everyone went to bed, because I was always too tired by the end of the day to turn it into a sweet little memory. I laughed anyway, because that's what women like me do when our insides shift and we don't want anyone to notice. "Tessa," I said softly, that's sweet." She didn't blink. She smiled right back. "And you're chilly," she continued, lowering her voice like we were sharing something intimate. "He said you'd make it on Sundays when he had football practice, and you'd let it simmer all day so the whole house smelled like cumin and onions. He told me he'd come in and you'd pretend you didn't see him sneak a bite." My throat tightened. I never made chili on Sundays. I worked on Sundays for most of Nathan's childhood. I worked because I had to. Because his father, God rest him, was the kind of man who could love you and still fail you at the same time. Because bills didn't care about my exhaustion. Because Nathan's cleats didn't buy themselves. I had made chili sometimes, sure. But not that way. Not with a whole day of simmering and a house full of comfort. And then she said the thing that truly made the room tilt. "That blue dress you wore to his 8th grade awards night," she said, eyes bright, as if she'd been there. "He said you looked so beautiful that night. He said you smelled like that powdery perfume. What was it? Lavender and something. And you hugged him so tight he could hardly breathe." My breath caught. Because there was no 8th grade awards night. Nathan had gone to 8th grade in a different city entirely, after we moved. And I didn't own a blue dress back then, not one I would have worn to anything awards night. I owned black slacks and practical blouses and one beige cardigan that pilled at the elbows. A cold bead of sweat slid down my spine beneath my blouse, and I forced myself to take a sip of water, as if my throat was simply dry. Nathan was smiling beside her, proud, as if hearing these stories made him feel cherished. But he didn't look confused. He didn't look like he was thinking, wait, Mom never did that. He looked relieved, like she had smoothed something in him. And that's when I knew, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't Tessa mixing him up with another man. She was speaking with confidence, specificity. She was building a picture of me, right there at the table, like she had spent time studying what kind of mother I should have been. If you've ever had a moment where your body goes still but your mind starts running, you'll understand what happened inside me. I watched her lips. I watched the way her nails were done. Soft pink, neat. I watched the way she rested her hand on Nathan's forearm like she'd done it 1,000 times. And I thought, how does this woman know details that don't belong to my life? And why is she telling them like they're true? Before I go on, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? And have you ever had a moment where someone spoke about your life like they knew it, and it left you feeling cold inside? If you can relate, even a little, you can hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Because what happened next changed the way I look at trust, at family, at the stories we tell about the people we love. I'm Nora, by the way. Nora Whitaker. 62 at the time of that dinner. An HR manager at a mid-sized manufacturing company outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of job where people think you sit behind a desk all day, but really, you spend your life managing other people's messes with a calm face and a tight stomach. I was proud of my life, not because it was glamorous, but because it was steady. I had built it piece by piece after years of instability. I had raised my son into a good man. I had a small townhouse with clean counters, a tidy guest room, and a garden out back where I grew basil and rosemary because the smell made me feel like I was doing something gentle. I had learned, over decades, how to live with dignity even when things hurt. So when Nathan called me and told me he was engaged to a woman I had never met, I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't demand explanations. I told him I was happy for him. And I meant it. Nathan was 32. He worked in logistics. He had always been responsible. Too responsible, sometimes, like he was born with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't the kind of man who fell in love recklessly. When he brought someone into his life, it mattered. That's what made me show up to that dinner wearing my nicest cream blouse and a necklace I rarely took out, the one with the small pearl pendant. I wanted to look like the mother of a man who was starting a family. I wanted to look like I belonged at that table. Tessa had chosen the restaurant, Nathan said. She liked places that felt special. She wanted the night to feel like a beginning. When I arrived, she stood to greet me immediately, her smile practiced but warm. "Nora," she said, reaching out both hands like we were already close. "It's so good to finally meet you." Finally. That word had landed strangely, but I'd brushed it off. People said things like that when they were excited, when they'd heard about you, when they wanted you to feel included. She hugged me, lightly, carefully, her perfume clean and expensive, like citrus and white flowers. And when she pulled back, she looked at me with an expression that almost felt like familiarity. It's hard to explain. Like she was looking at a photograph and matching it to real life. Nathan had beamed. "Mom, isn't she great?" And I, wanting to keep the peace, wanting to be the steady presence I'd always tried to be, smiled and said, "She's lovely." That dinner started normally enough. We ordered appetizers. We made polite conversation. Nathan told a story about a shipping error at work that made him sound competent and important. Tessa laughed at all the right moments. But every so often, she'd slip in another detail. You always told him to fold his towels the same way, she said casually, and my heart thudded because I had, once, scolded him for that. Exactly once, after he left damp towels on the bathroom floor and they mildewed. How did you? I started, then stopped myself, because Nathan was smiling again, and I didn't want to make it awkward. He talks about you, Tessa said easily. All the time. And maybe that should have comforted me. But it didn't. Because the details she offered weren't just, he talks about you. They were too polished. Too cinematic. Like stories designed to make her look like the perfect grateful future daughter-in-law. And to make me look like a warm, cozy mother straight out of a movie. And I was not that mother. I loved my son. But I was tired. I was strict. I was practical. I didn't have the luxury of being soft all the time. So when she thanked me for raising him, and then described holidays and moments that never happened, something inside me began to whisper a question I didn't want to hear. Who has been telling her my life? And why are they rewriting it? The drive home that night felt longer than it should have. The streetlights blurred into soft yellow streaks on the windshield, and I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, as if holding on to something solid might keep my thoughts from drifting too far. I replayed the dinner in fragments, the way Tessa tilted her head when she spoke, the confidence in her voice, the way Nathan watched her like she was a miracle he was afraid might disappear if he blinked too long. I told myself I was overthinking. I'd done that before. Years of HR work had trained me to look for patterns, for inconsistencies, for what people didn't say, but I'd also learned that suspicion, when fed too freely, could poison even good things. Still that night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the hallway. I stared at the ceiling and let memories come, one by one, like old photographs sliding from a box. Nathan as a boy, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while I reheated leftovers. Nathan at 12, sulking because I wouldn't let him quit piano. Nathan at 17, angry and distant, already halfway out the door toward his own life. I loved him fiercely, but our relationship had never been the soft, storybook thing Tessa described. So how did she know these things? Or rather, why did she think she knew them? The next morning, I made coffee and stood by the window, watching a neighbor walk her dog past my small front yard. I told myself to let it go. To be grateful my son had found someone who seemed kind and attentive. To stop picking at threads that might unravel something fragile. But curiosity, once awakened, doesn't rest easily. Later that week, Nathan called me during my lunch break. His voice was light, cheerful. Tessa wants to have you over this weekend, he said. Just something small. She wants to cook for you. I hesitated. That's very nice of her. She's nervous, he added. She really wants you to like her. There was something in his tone, hopeful, almost pleading, that softened me. Whatever unease I felt, I didn't want to be the kind of mother who stood in the way of her child's happiness. So I agreed. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a newer building, all clean lines and neutral colors. When I arrived, Tessa opened the door with an apron on and flour on her cheek, like she'd dabbed it there on purpose. Nora, you made it, she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted just a second too long. The smell inside was warm and comforting. Garlic, onions, something simmering. For a moment, I let myself relax. We sat at their small dining table while Nathan finished setting things out. Tessa poured wine and asked about my week, my job, my commute. She listened closely, nodding at the right moments. Then she said casually, "You always said consistency mattered more than affection, didn't you?" I blinked. What? She smiled apologetically. "Sorry. Nathan talks about how you taught him discipline. That you believed love was shown through showing up, not through hugs." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. That one landed closer to the truth. Too close. I had said something like that once years ago, during a fight after he'd accused me of being cold. I remembered standing by the sink, hands wet, voice tight, saying, "Love isn't always soft, Nathan. Sometimes it's showing up even when you're exhausted." I hadn't repeated it. I hadn't framed it as wisdom. It had been a tired confession, not a life lesson. My chest tightened. "Tessa," I said carefully, where do you hear these things?" She looked surprised, then laughed lightly. "From Nathan, of course." Nathan glanced up, frowning just a little. "Yeah, Mom. I've told her stuff. About growing up. About you." "But when?" I asked before I could stop myself. "You and I don't talk like that. Not in detail." There it was. A small silence. Not dramatic. Just enough to be noticed. Nathan shrugged. "I don't know. Over time." Tessa reached for his hand. "It helps me understand him better." I nodded, forcing a smile. The food tasted suddenly flat in my mouth. After dinner, while Nathan washed the dishes, Tessa excused herself to the bathroom. I sat alone at the table, listening to the sound of running water, my heart thudding in a slow, uneasy rhythm. That was when I noticed the notebook. It lay on the sideboard near the door, half hidden under a stack of mail. A slim, soft-covered thing, pale blue. The kind of notebook people use for journaling or lists. I didn't mean to touch it. I really didn't. But something in me, some quiet instinct sharpened by years of reading people, pulled me toward it. I told myself I was just moving it out of the way. Just being helpful. When I lifted it, it fell open. And there, in neat, careful handwriting, were my words. Or at least versions of them. "Mother believes discipline equals love. Raised him mostly alone. Worked long hours. Felt emotionally unavailable. Feels guilty about being too hard. Responds well to gratitude." I stared at the page, my breath shallow. There were more entries. Pages and pages. Little observations. Psychological notes. Fragments of stories from my life. Some true, some distorted, some painfully private. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't casual conversation. This was study. I heard the bathroom door open and snapped the notebook shut, my hands shaking. I placed it back exactly where it had been and sat down again, heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Tessa returned first, smiling. Nathan followed, drying his hands on a towel. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said too quickly. "Just full." We made small talk for a few more minutes, and then I stood to leave. Tessa hugged me again, warm and deliberate. "Thank you for trusting me with your son," she said softly, into my ear. I smiled, because that's what I'd learned to do. But inside, a single terrifying thought kept repeating itself. She knows me because someone taught her how. On the drive home, my hands trembled on the wheel. I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with Nathan in my head, searching for moments I'd been too open, too honest. But the truth settled in slowly, heavily. This wasn't just my son talking to his fiancée. This was someone feeding her a version of me. Someone close. Someone intentional. And whoever it was sitting comfortably at that table, smiling with the rest of us. Before we go on, let me ask you something gently. Have you ever realized someone knew parts of your life that you never chose to share? What did you do when that trust cracked? You can tell me in the comments, if you feel like it. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on my side listening to the old house settle, the faint click of pipes cooling, the distant hum of a passing car. Every so often, my mind drifted back to that pale blue notebook, the way the pages looked lived in, handled, studied. By morning, I had made a decision, not a dramatic one, not a confrontational one, just a quiet decision to pay attention. Years in HR had taught me that truth rarely announces itself. It leaks. It slips. It reveals itself in patterns, in tone, in what people forget to hide. Over the next few weeks, I watched more carefully. Nathan called more often than usual. Short calls, always cheerful, always a little rushed. He asked questions he hadn't asked in years. Did you ever regret working so much when I was little? Were you close to your mother? Did you ever feel like you had to prove yourself? Each question landed gently, almost casually, but together they formed a shape. A funnel. I answered carefully. Not dishonestly, but not fully. I gave him neutral truths. Safe truths. And every time, without fail, Tessa seemed to know. At the next dinner, she'd reference something I'd mentioned only in passing on the phone. A feeling. A fear. A regret I hadn't said out loud in decades. You always wished you'd been softer, she said once, passing me the salt. You told Nathan that. I hadn't. I watched her face when she spoke, open, earnest, almost rehearsed. And I began to understand something that made my chest ache in a very specific way. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to understand me. Or rather, she was trying to master the version of me that lived inside my son. It's strange, realizing someone has built a picture of you using borrowed pieces. Stranger still to realize that the person handing them those pieces is your own child. The realization didn't come all at once. It came slowly, the way grief does, through small, undeniable moments. One afternoon, Nathan stopped by my house unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen, chopping onions for soup. The radio was playing softly, an old Motown song I liked. He leaned against the counter, watching me in a way that made me feel like I was being assessed. You know, he said, Tessa says you always regret not being more emotionally available. I paused mid-chop. The knife hovered over the cutting board. She says you carry a lot of guilt. I set the knife down carefully. Nathan, I said, keeping my voice even, why are you telling her these things? He shrugged, eyes flicking away. We talk. That's what couples do. Yes, I said. But you're telling her things I've never said to you. Or things I said once years ago, in a different context. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, you're overthinking it. There it was again. That phrase. The gentle dismissal. The subtle turning of the tables. I'm not accusing you, I said quietly. I'm asking you to help me understand. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, his back to me. Tessa just wants to be close to you, he said finally. She wants to fit in. She studies people. That's just how she is. Studies people. The word echoed in my mind. After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, my soup untouched. The house felt heavier somehow, like it was holding its breath. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a box in the back of my closet. Inside were old journals, thin, cheap notebooks from my 30s and 40s. I hadn't written in them often, mostly on nights when the weight of everything pressed too hard and I needed somewhere to put it. I read slowly, carefully, my own handwriting unfamiliar in places. The decision didn't come to me in a burst of courage. It came quietly, the way most honest decisions do, while I was folding laundry one evening, standing in my small bedroom with a lamp casting a soft yellow circle on the wall. I was folding one of Nathan's old t-shirts, the kind I never quite managed to throw away. The cotton had thinned over the years, soft from hundreds of washes. I held it for a moment, breathing in that faint, clean scent of detergent, and thought about how much of my life had been spent holding things together without ever explaining myself. I realized then that I didn't want revenge. I didn't want confrontation for the sake of drama. What I wanted, what I needed, was truth, spoken gently but clearly, before this version of me hardened into something I didn't recognize. So I invited them over. Just the three of us. I chose a Sunday afternoon. Neutral. Calm. Daylight makes people less theatrical, I've found. I cleaned the house slowly that morning, not obsessively, just enough to feel settled. I brewed coffee and set out a small plate of lemon cookies I'd made the night before. Nothing fancy. Familiar. When they arrived, Tessa complimented the house the way she always did, warmly, with appreciation that felt rehearsed but sincere. Nathan kissed my cheek, smelling faintly of aftershave, the same brand he'd used for years. We sat at the kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, catching dust motes in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. I took a breath. "There's something I want to talk about," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I want to say it carefully, because I don't want anyone to feel attacked." Both of them looked at me, attentive. "I've noticed," I continued, "that sometimes, Tessa, you talk about my past as if you were there. About things I've never actually told you." She blinked, surprised. "Oh, I'm not angry," I said gently, "but I am confused. And I think it's important we're honest with each other." Nathan shifted in his chair. His knees started bouncing, a small tell he'd had since childhood. Tessa folded her hands together. "I only know what Nathan's shared," she said carefully. "I never meant to overstep." "I understand that," I said. "But some of what you've said isn't quite how it happened." Silence stretched. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the distant sound of a lawnmower outside. Nathan cleared his throat. "Mom, I didn't mean for this to be a thing." "I know," I said softly. "But it is." He looked down at his hands. For a moment, he looked very young. "I guess," he started, then stopped. He swallowed. "I guess I filled in some blanks." Tessa glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He rubbed his face. "I told you stories the way I remembered them. Or the way I needed them to be." The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate. "I didn't lie on purpose," he went on quickly. "But growing up, I always felt like I had to be strong. Like emotions were inconvenient. And when I talked about Mom, I think I turned her into someone tougher than she really was. Someone who had it all together." My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. Tessa's voice was softer now. "You told me she never cried." I let out a small breath. "Oh, I cried," I said. "Just not where you could see it." She looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing a layer she hadn't allowed herself to see before. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought, if I understood you, You'd accept me more easily. There it was. Not malice. Not manipulation. Fear. I wanted to be the kind of woman you'd approve of, she continued. So I tried to learn you. I thought if I knew your story, I could fit into it. Her voice trembled just slightly. I didn't mean to take it from you. The room went quiet again. This time, the silence felt different. Less sharp, more fragile. I folded my hands on the table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my palms. I don't need to be studied, I said gently. And I don't need to be impressed. I just need to be met where I am. Nathan looked up at me then, eyes shiny. I didn't realize I was doing this to you, he said. I wanted her to understand why I am the way I am. I know, I said. And I love that you want to be understood. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But when you tell my story for me, when you polish it or simplify it, you take something away. Not just from me. From yourself, too. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Tessa wiped at the corner of her eye. I thought if I could be the perfect daughter-in-law, if I could say the right things, you'd accept me. I reached across the table then, surprising myself, and placed my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold. You don't have to perform to belong, I said quietly. You don't have to memorize my life to earn a place in it. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. That conversation didn't fix everything. Real life rarely works that way. But something shifted. A line was drawn, not harshly, but clearly. In the weeks that followed, things changed in small, almost invisible ways. Tessa stopped finishing my sentences. She asked questions instead of offering interpretations. When she complimented me, it was about something real and present. My cooking, my garden, the way I listened. Nathan, too, grew quieter, more thoughtful. He stopped narrating my past like a story he owned. And I learned something about myself in the process. I learned that boundaries don't have to be loud to be firm. I learned that being understood isn't the same as being interpreted. And I learned that sometimes, the most meaningful act of love is correcting the story, gently, before it hardens into something untrue. There was one final moment, weeks later, that settled everything for me. We were sitting on the porch one evening, the air warm and still. Tessa handed me a cup of tea and said, almost shyly, "You know, I don't actually know what your favorite memory with Nathan is." I smiled. "That's because I've never told you." She waited. And this time, I chose what to share. Not the polished version. Not the heroic one. Just the truth. Before we move forward, let me ask you something. Have you ever had to reclaim your own story from someone who meant well but got it wrong? And how did that feel? The memory I chose to share with her wasn't dramatic. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't something you'd put in a speech or a scrapbook. It was small. I remember one night, I began, my voice low, when Nathan was about 9. I'd worked a double shift. My feet hurt so badly I could barely stand. The house was dark when I came in, and I thought he was asleep. Tessa sat very still, both hands wrapped around her mug. But he was sitting on the floor of his room, building something out of scraps. Cardboard. Tape. A broken ruler. He looked up at me and said, "I made you a desk so you don't have to work so hard." My throat tightened a little. It was crooked. Wobbly. Useless, really. But he'd stayed up past bedtime trying to help me. I smiled softly. I didn't say anything wise. I didn't turn it into a lesson. I just sat on the floor with him and cried a little. And he panicked because he thought he'd done something wrong. Tessa let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but her eyes were wet. That's beautiful, she said. It was messy, I replied gently. And ordinary. And real. She nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me that. After that evening, something eased between us. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough that the air felt less tight. Conversations became simpler, more honest, less rehearsed. Still, the ripple of what had happened didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Nathan asked if I could meet him for coffee. Just the two of us. His voice on the phone sounded serious, almost nervous. We met at a small cafe near my office, one I'd been going to for years. The barista knew my order. The place smelled like espresso and warm pastries, grounding and familiar. Nathan arrived early and stood when he saw me. He hugged me a little too tightly. I've been thinking, he said once we sat down. He stared at his cup instead of at me. About what you said. About me. Telling your story. I waited. I think I did it because I needed you to be stronger than you were, he admitted. I needed to believe you were always okay. That you never struggled. Because if you struggled, then maybe I should have helped more. Or noticed more. His voice cracked slightly. I reached across the table and touched his hand. You were a child, Nathan. I know, he said quickly. I know that now. But back then, it felt easier to rewrite things than to sit with the guilt. I nodded slowly. That made sense. It hurt, but it made sense. And Tessa, he continued. She listens. She absorbs everything. I think I let her build this version of you because it made me feel better about myself. There it was. The truth, spoken plainly. I never meant for it to hurt you, he said. I know, I replied. And I meant it. We sat quietly for a moment, the sounds of the cafe wrapping around us. Cups clinking, someone laughing softly at another table. I need you to let me be human, I said finally. Not a symbol. Not a lesson. Just your mother. He nodded, eyes shining. I will. And to his credit, he did try. The real shift came a month later, at a small engagement gathering Tessa's parents hosted. It was nothing fancy, just a backyard evening with string lights and folding chairs. Neighbors wandered in and out. Someone grilled burgers. Someone else played old music from a speaker. At one point, Tessa's mother asked me, warmly, "So what was Nathan like growing up?" I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The moment where I used to brace myself for someone else to tell my story for me. But before Tessa could speak, Nathan glanced at me. I think that's Mom's story to tell, he said simply. The words landed softly, but they landed. Everyone turned toward me. Not expectantly. Not awkwardly. Just open. I took a breath and spoke. He was curious, I said. Sensitive. Sometimes stubborn. Sometimes lonely. We didn't always get things right, but we did the best we could with what we had. That was all. No performance. No polish. Just truth. Tessa smiled at me then, not the careful, studied smile from before, but something quieter. Something real. Later that evening, she came to sit beside me on the porch steps. I hope you know, she said, staring out at the yard. I wasn't trying to take anything from you. I know, I said. I just wanted to belong. I nodded. Belonging doesn't come from knowing someone's past, I told her. It comes from showing up honestly in the present. She absorbed that in silence. From then on, things weren't perfect, but they were honest. She stopped narrating my life. I stopped guarding it so tightly. Nathan learned, slowly, to let his parents be human in his stories, not symbols. And I learned something too. That protecting your story doesn't mean keeping it locked away. It means choosing when and how to share it. It means correcting gently. Speaking up before resentment has time to grow roots. These days, when I look back at that dinner, the one where she thanked me for a life I didn't recognize, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. Because that moment forced me to reclaim my own voice. It reminded me that even in our 60s, even after decades of being mothers and workers and caretakers, we still get to define ourselves. We get to say, "That's not quite my story," and then tell the truth. Slowly, kindly, in our own words. Before we reach the end, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever let someone misunderstand you just to keep the peace? And if so, what did it cost you? Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of things, not by erasing them, but by teaching you how to hold them without cutting yourself. Months passed after that evening on the porch. Life returned to its quieter rhythms. Work, errands, phone calls, the small rituals that make up a life when the drama settles. And yet, something fundamental had shifted inside me. I noticed it first in small moments. Like the way I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head before seeing Nathan and Tessa. I didn't prepare explanations or soften my opinions in advance. I spoke when something mattered to me, and I stayed silent when it didn't. The weight I hadn't realized I was carrying began to loosen. Tessa, for her part, changed too. She became less performative, more tentative in a way that felt honest rather than insecure. She asked questions instead of offering conclusions. Sometimes she would catch herself mid-sentence and laugh softly, saying, "That's not my place to say, is it?" And I would answer gently, "Not yet. But you're learning." One afternoon, she came over alone while Nathan was at work. She brought a small potted plant, rosemary, she said, because she remembered I liked to cook with it. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling across the surface like warm water. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, tracing the rim of her mug, "about how I try to earn belonging." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was younger than I'd first thought. Not just in years, but in certainty. There was a hunger there I recognized, a need to be chosen, approved of, anchored. "My mother," she hesitated, then continued. "She was hard to please. I learned early that love came with conditions. If I knew what people wanted, if I could mirror it back to them, I was safe." Her voice didn't shake, but it was quiet. I nodded slowly. "That's a heavy thing to carry." She swallowed. "When Nathan talked about you, I thought, if I could understand you, if I could reflect you perfectly, then maybe you'd accept me. Maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged." There it was. The heart of it. I reached for my tea, buying myself a moment. Then I said, "Belonging that has to be earned by performance isn't belonging at all. It's exhaustion." Her eyes filled, just slightly. "I know that now," she whispered. That conversation didn't make us best friends. It didn't erase the awkwardness or the history. But it did something quieter and more important. It made space for honesty without fear. Not long after, Nathan and Tessa asked me to help them with wedding planning. Not decisions, they said. Just perspective. Stories. Advice if I wanted to give it. We sat together one evening going through old photo albums I'd pulled from the closet. Real ones, with bent corners and fading ink. "This was our first apartment," I said, pointing to a blurry picture. The heater barely worked. We used the oven for warmth. Nathan laughed softly. I remember that. I smiled. You probably remember the stories more than the reality. He looked at me then, thoughtful. Maybe. But I want to know the real parts now. So I told them, not the heroic version, not the tragic one. Just the truth. About being tired. About making mistakes. About loving fiercely even when I didn't always know how to show it well. Tessa listened without interrupting. No notes. No analysis. Just presence. Later that night, as they were leaving, she paused at the door. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," she said quietly. "I won't borrow it again." I believed her. The wedding, when it came, was simple, warm, honest. No speeches that turned my life into a lesson. No polished tributes. Just laughter, music, and a sense of ease I hadn't expected to feel. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "I raised a son who grew into a man willing to reflect on himself," I said. "And I've come to know a woman who's brave enough to unlearn what she was taught. That feels like a good beginning to me." I saw Tessa blink back tears. Nathan reached for her hand. And in that moment, I felt something settle deep inside my chest. Not triumph, not vindication, but peace. Because the truth is, I didn't need to be perfectly understood. I only needed to be seen as I was, not as a symbol or a story someone else needed me to be. These days, I still think about how easily our lives can become narratives in someone else's mouth. How often women, especially, are flattened into roles. Strong mother, difficult mother, distant mother, when the truth is always more layered than that. I still work, though fewer hours now. I still tend my little garden. I still make soup on quiet evenings and listen to the radio while it simmers. Nathan calls regularly. Tessa does too, sometimes just to ask how my day was. And when she thanks me now, it's for things I actually did. A recipe. A piece of advice. A moment of listening. That feels enough. Looking back, I realized the real betrayal wasn't that someone tried to rewrite my life. It was how easily I almost let them. But I didn't. I chose to speak. Gently. Honestly. In my own time. And in doing so, I gave myself something I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. The right to define my own story. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt yourself shrinking to fit someone else's version of you, I hope you know this. It's not too late to take your story back. You don't have to shout. You don't have to accuse. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet truth spoken out loud. Before I go, I want to leave you with something gentle to sit with. When you reach a certain age, you start to understand how often your life has been narrated by others. By your children, your partner, your family, even by strangers who think they understand you because they've heard pieces of your story. And sometimes, without realizing it, you let them. Because correcting people takes energy. Because peace feels easier than precision. Because you tell yourself it doesn't really matter. But it does. Your story is not a prop. It isn't a lesson for someone else to polish or reshape so it fits their needs. It's made of real mornings and long nights. Of compromises you didn't announce. Of strength you didn't perform. Of tenderness you gave quietly, without witnesses. I've learned that reclaiming your story doesn't have to be loud or angry. It can be as simple as saying, "That's not quite how it was," and allowing the truth to breathe again. It can be choosing honesty over harmony, even when your voice trembles a little. Especially then. If you're listening to this and you've spent years letting others define you, as the strong one, the difficult one, the distant one, the reliable one, I hope you pause for a moment tonight and ask yourself who you are when no one else is speaking for you. You deserve to be known as you are, not as you were edited to be. Thank you for sitting with my story. If it touched something in you, you're not alone, and you're always welcome here. And before I go, let me ask you one last thing. If you could go back and gently correct one misunderstanding about yourself, just one, what would you say?